Good evening and welcome everyone. On behalf of Digra India, allow me to express my delight and pleasure at having all of you here today. We have the honor of hosting Sampad Banerjee, who's here to deliver what promises to be a highly exciting talk titled, Where Can I Get the Game? Preservation of Video Games and Why It Matters. I extend a warm welcome to you, Sampad, and take this opportunity to introduce Sampad formally. Sampad
Well,
Banerjee is a 24-year-old gamer who spends his time obsessing over RPGs, fighting games, and hack and slash games in unhealthy amounts, with Sega's Yakuza and Capcom's Devil May Cry being his all-time favorites. He is a BCA grad and has actively participated in local gaming events as a volunteer, while also occasionally cosplaying in them. In his free time, he can mostly be found hyping up random indie projects over at his Twitter. He currently writes, interviews developers and publishers, and reviews video games for sportskeeda.com, gttalks.com, with gamingbowl.com being one of his bylines where he used to cover gaming news. Thank you, Sampad, for being here today.
thank you so much.
Before I hand the mic over to you, I have a few housekeeping rules for our audience to keep in mind. Please remember to keep your mic on mute during the talk. If you have any issues or questions, please use the chat box and we will get back to you. There will be a question and answer session at the end of Sampad's talk, and all of you are requested to kindly post your questions in the chat box, which will then be addressed to Sampad during the session. All right, over to you, Sampad.
Well, thank you so much. First thing first, thank you so much for having me over here. I mean, this is probably the first time I'm even talking about something related to video game in such a capacity, because I like to write instead of explaining stuff, because I'm not a very good orator, someone who is like very much into like, speaking about things. It's just like me being a bit awkward in real life, so it kind of seeps into the whole thing at the same time. But anyways, once again, my name is Sampad Banerjee. I do reviews, I write about video games, I do interviews for indie, I do interviews for developers and like indie developers, mostly indie developers. I'm for sportskira.com and currently a smaller website called GG Talks. And yeah, today we're going to talk about personally one of my favorite topics to talk about. I have been trying to write something related to this for a past couple of months, which hasn't been too successful, I would say, because I haven't gotten the proper points yet as to how to like put my thoughts forward. So I hope like through today's whole this whole session, I finally have some sort of idea as to how I want to write that article of mine. So before we start the topic for the day, which is where can I get that game, which is a question which I ask myself a lot every now and then. Like, hey, I used to play this video game. Where can I get that game now? Because it has been a long while. Like, like video game is one of those art forms which has been there since probably pre-90s, but over the time, like some of the classics have gone, like some of the classics are lost for like various reasons. So this talk today is going to be covering most of those stuff, like why are those games lost and what can we do to maybe like prevent those games to get lost in the near future, because video game as a genre is like always evolving and like getting better, and just like any software medium out there, it also like has the chances of getting like destroyed or being lost to like to a varying degrees. So yeah, that is the topic for the day. Where can I get that game? Preservation of video games and why it matters. Before we move on to like everything, I want to like start this topics or session with one of my personal favorite video games, which I gush over a lot over the years, and I also feel very frustrated because I kind of know like the reason why the game is not available. So it is a game which is pretty near and dear to my heart, because that is like one of the first few games which I played when I got myself my personal PC. It's called No One Lives Forever. I think quite a lot of you people might have heard about this game to some capacity. And fun fact, this game is one of the few games out there which actually showed like which actually had levels in India in like proper sense. So No One Lives Forever 1 had a level in Punjab, if I'm not wrong, and No One Lives Forever 2 had a level in Kolkata, like in like focused around Park Street area. So so the case about No One Lives Forever is like pretty interesting. So this game was out back in 2003 and was still in like proper legal prints. Like there were legal prints out there to purchase and like play the game on your personal PC up until 2007. After which the company which was responsible for publishing the rights, publishing the game, Sierra, pretty much got dissolved and was purchased by, and parts of the games were purchased by various companies out there. Two of them, one of them being Activision Blizzard, and the other one being Warner Brothers. So why am I calling this the curious case of No One Lives Forever is because this is like one of those games out of all the IPs which went into like different publishers after the Sierra dissolvement, is that this game was the IP for this game is being held hostage, I would say, uh, between three different companies, like, and maybe many more, because people still do not know who has the proper IP rights for this game. So a part of his IP is with Activision Blizzard, definitely, because the Blizzard kind of did buy few of the IPs from the company when it got dissolved. A part of this IP again is with Warner Brothers, and another part is with, surprisingly, Fox Media, which is a name which you would think you wouldn't be hearing pretty commonly in video games. But this game, the rights apparently are with Fox Media. So because Fox helped in making making both the games out back then. So back in, I think 2014 or 15, my memory is a bit fuzzy because like various reasons. Nine Dice Studio tried to resurrect the game. I mean, Nine Dice Studios are like pretty well known when it comes to making remasters or re-releases for very old games. They were responsible for making System Shock 1. Currently, they are remaking System Shock, the first System Shock, remastering System Shock 2, and Blade Runner, the Westwood Blade Runner point-and-click adventure games, and a lot of other games. So Night Dive tried to resurrect this game out here, and they were pretty much unsuccessful because, as I said before, the rights are with like three different companies, and none of the companies know like who has the proper rights with. So the plans were pretty much abandoned. And not like the abandoned video game, which is still coming out, apparently. It was literally abandoned. Like there was no hope about it. And Night Dive Studio CEO Stephen Kick still thinks that there might be a way to bring this back someday. But for now, this is an abandonware. It is not available anywhere to purchase, apart from the other questionable resources out there in the internet. The next game which I'm going to be sharing about is another game which is very near and dear to my heart for like various reasons. One particular reason being that I played this game at a time where I was in real life, I was going through like certain issues, and I kind of connected with this game to like for various reasons. Which is the Silent Hill series, the first 4 games which are made by Team Silent under Konami. The thing about Silent Hill is a more interesting one, and this is in part because of the publisher Konami itself, is that the first 3 games source codes are not available. Like the complete source codes are not available anywhere. So back then, during the 90s and 2000s, what Japanese developers used to do is that they would, after releasing a particular game, they used to like pretty much just say like, you know what, job's done, my hands are clean, there's no point in like saving this game anymore, throw it out, we need to make some space out there. And it is, to play the devil's advocate, I would say like it makes sense because back then memory space and everything was pretty costly, and to save cost, maybe that was the reason why they used to do this. And a lot of companies, Japanese companies, used to do this. Squaresoft, which is now known as Square Enix after the merging with the Japanese company Enix, they couldn't find the source code for Final Fantasy VIII for a long period of time, up until I think back in 2020 or 2021, when they probably found like a source code which is like workable and which is properly workable, and they released the game. Basically they remastered it to a certain degree and re-released it for the modern systems. The case about Silent Hill 2 is that this game doesn't have any proper source codes out there. Like there is no source code out there. Konami doesn't know if there is one, and even if there is, they do not bother. They're not bothered about it because the company's goals have shifted to a completely different area, which we are not going to talk about. And the first three games are not available out there, as I said, because of the source code issue. The fourth game is available currently on the website, currently on the online marketplace GOG.com, which specializes in releasing the good old games. And the only available copy for Silent Hill 2 or any of these two games out there, Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3, is thanks to someone saving the PC version of it and kept it in the internet. Konami is not bothered finding out if there is anything like that available out there with them. They are not interested in reverse engineering the incomplete source code which they have with them, because last time they did that, it was disastrous, to say the least. That was for the Silent Hill HD collection for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, which is considered to be one of the worst remasters to be available out there. But yes, this is the case of Silent Hill 2. Again, a game which is very near and dear to my heart, and probably a lot of other people's out there, which is not available to purchase because of the developers not taking care of the future. Thirdly, we're going to be talking about a very recent happening event, which happened like exactly, I think, last month, March to February, is that Nintendo announcing that the 3DS and Wii U eShop will be shutting down altogether. What that means is that any or every game which is available on the eShop, be it a small title or a big title, is now going to be inaccessible from next year onwards because of the closure of the shop. And what is even worse is that some of the games out there in the Wii U eShop were playable thanks to the virtual console, which Nintendo was developing, an in-house emulator which emulated the games under Nintendo's umbrella, which will be inaccessible and unplayable as of now, unless Nintendo releases them for Nintendo Switch, which is very doubtful, I would say. Now, all three of these games have something very common, and I think you guys have already figured it out. Like, why is he talking about two games which is not available anymore out there in the market, or which is not available to play anymore? And why is he talking about, and what is the big deal about Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShop closing down? I mean, there must be some way to like preserve them and everything, right? And that is where the preservation of video game comes in. Now, one must think like, wait, what does video game preservation means? I mean, we have heard about movie preservation, we have heard about music preservation. What is video game preservation? Well, in simple terms, it is pretty much like movie or video game preservations. It is pretty much like movie or music preservation. It is basically ensuring that the video game is easily accessible in the near future. So that if some person goes through a certain video game, for example, let me just take my own example. If I today want to play a copy of System Shock 1, I wouldn't have to worry about searching up where the game is right now. I just have to go on Steam. I just have to search up the name System Shock, and a playable copy of that game is available very readily to me, which is also playable on my system without any extra tweaking, because the developers and publishers have ensured that the game is available to us. So that is what video game preservation is, ensuring that the game is preserved so that the future generations can play this game at a time when it won't be readily available for us to play. Uh, like how should I say this? Like the reason why we can watch such old classic movies by the old classic samurai movies from Japan is because someone did preserve the movies and they are readily available out there right now in a legal way. So it is pretty much like that. Video game preservation also like follows the whole idea like that. Now, there are a few types of preservation when it comes to video game preservation. It is not only like one single type of preservation, and developers and publishers preserve video games in like certain ways. For example, ports are a good way to preserve a video game. Let's take the example of System Shock. That game came out on a system which is not readily available anymore. So what Night Dive Studios did is they took out the source code, they reverse engineered it, and they made sure that the current version of the game is playable properly on the modern systems out there. So that is basically like the porting job, like taking a particular copy of a game or a media, reverse engineering it, and ensuring that it runs on the other ecosystems out there. System Shock currently doesn't have any sort of extra ports for its game on any other consoles or any other like gaming systems out there. But the other games by Night Dive Studio, for example, Shadow Man Remaster, which is a Nintendo 64 game, which was recently released back in February, remastered and re-released by Night Dive, is readily available out there because it was a port job. They ported the game so that it is preserved and everyone else can play. The second way to preserve is emulation. Now, emulation is a very gray area, to be honest. Some people say that it is illegal to emulate a particular console. I say that it is free real estate. Go for it, emulate a console, because consoles are just like consoles are like any other electronic medium out there. Like it is bound to break down, it is bound to be inaccessible. So emulation is like another way where it preserves the essence of the console. Unfortunately, maybe it might not be the real deal, but at least a person, if they want to experience like, hey, how does a Commodore 64 works, or how does the original PlayStation 1 works, how did the game work on that, they can just like download an emulator, put a game on it, and just play that game. Similarly, if they have a legal copy of a game somewhere from a console which they used to own, they can just use an emulator, use the copy from that game, and just play it and enjoy that experience again. And third is, of course, physical preservation. That is pretty straightforward, self-descriptive, just preserving video games on a more just preserving video games physically. I was having a talk with Shobik Da before this, Professor Shobik Mukherjee, before we started this whole talk, and he was like telling me about I have a copy of No One Lives Forever physical, which I found at a certain place out there. So that is like one way of preserving video games, because as I said, No One Lives Forever is not available anymore, and the only available copies of the game are with people who have preserved it with them. There are organizations out there who takes it upon themselves to preserve video games with them for future usage. Video game collectors do that very actively, and that is a very valid way of preserving video games. So you must be wondering now, wait, so if there are these many ways to preserve a video game, why are games like No One Lives Forever and so many other games are still inaccessible to the general mass public? Like, why is it not there? Why can't we buy it right now? I mean, it should be easy, right? If someone saved it somewhere, it should be accessible properly. And the simple way to like explain it as to why this whole thing is like this is because, well, copyright laws. And it is like I made sure that this slide was like pretty boldly explained. Like, this is the exact reason why video game preservation right now is super important, because copyright laws hinder the whole process of saving video games right now for the near future. Because compared to the movie or music preservation, or even like book preservation, like any other media preservation out there, video game preservation is kind of messy. And it is partly in reason because of the laws which have been for set up in favor of the publishers out there, and publishers ensuring that they take like any sort of energy in their whole body to ensure that the game is out of the reach and the game is only available when they want it by themselves. So as per a report, as per 2018 report by the Association of Research Libraries, uh, as it is written over there, archivists face various problems that range from legal restrictions around intellectual property to the technological challenges of obtaining or recreating versions of the various consoles. As I said, emulation is a very valid way to preserve a particular console out there, but once again, the legality revolving around it is in a pretty gray area. Like there is no right or wrong here, but at the same time, the publishers or the platform holders take it upon themselves to make sure that a particular game or a particular console emulator is like out of the reach, because again, it kind of leans into the piracy. But at the same time, you need to realize whether is it piracy or not, because you're trying to preserve a video game for like educational purpose or a console for educational purpose. If something is not readily available out there in a mass produced way, then how will someone experience that console or that video game, right? But as I said, copyright laws are there in place for video game platform holders and video game publishers to ensure that they are the ones who control the whole preservation aspect of it, and not some third party or some organization out there. Because again, the major hurdle is risking copyright infringement of multi-billion-dollar companies. Video game industry right now is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that is a fact. A lot of numbers are out there by a lot. Sorry about that. A lot of numbers are out there by a lot of reputed journals and a lot of reputed publications that video game industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and whenever something is a multi-billion-dollar company or a multi-billion-dollar industry, it is bound to become very controlling. It is bound to happen. And whenever something is also multi-billion-dollar, lawyers and suits are a thing which a general public would not be interested in which a general public would not be interested in, like meddling into, because no one likes to get like thousands of dollars worth of fines or lawsuit on them. So why is copyright laws like one of the hurdles when it comes to preserving video games? Well, let me just move it a little bit up here. I hope it is not on my screen, me talking on the Zoom app. There's a bar right there on my top right. I'm so sorry, I got distracted. It looks nice. So one of the legal rights, like the legal rights are designed in such a way that it favors the big companies instead of like the other general public out there, where the laws incentivize innovation by allowing them to capitalize on a particular video game company's work. And again, whenever you get to capitalize something, you are bound to hold the rights to them. And when you hold the rights to something, it pretty much means that you get to decide how and what a particular thing is available to anyone out there. So that is what is happening. That is one of the reasons why preservation is difficult and not something like, oh, I pick it up, I save it, done. And of course, the other reason is a general copyright protection that a company gets for the IPs and games. Again, pretty descriptive copyright laws and IPs are there set in place so that no one can pick intellectual property and just use it just like that. And that also kind of prevents the preservation of video games. Let me see. So why is game preservation important? Why is saving something like Silent Hill 2 or No One Lives Forever or a Commodore 64 or a version of Commodore 64 is so important? Like, why does it have to take so much importance? Well, first thing first, easier access to the game in the future. Okay, I need to rephrase it properly. I'm so sorry. I got sidetracked a little bit. So the reason why game preservation is important is, of course, for like so that we can access it properly in the near future, or the future generation can check the games in the near future. If someone today wants to check a game like, let's say, the first two Diablo 1 and 2, they can go to the online web store gog.com and readily purchase them and start playing it right now out of the box without even doing any sort of tinkering with it. The same will be applicable in the near future, some years down the line, as long as the copyright, as long as the distribution rights are on place. So that so the reason why we should be preserving video games is one of the core reasons that we got to save a media so that we can access it in the near future and check what it is all about. The reason why today I could go and play 2K games, 2K checks Mafia 1 on Steam storefront is because 2K Games ensured that the first Mafia game from the PlayStation 2 and Xbox was preserved in a way so that it is accessible for everyone to go and check. And the second aspect is the corruption of media. That is like another biggest reason why game preservation is pretty important. As mentioned on this slide, physical media gets corrupted over the time, risking the game being lost for good, which is definitely not good. We do not want something like Super Mario to get lost in the history in the history books and is only accessible on the history books. The reason why is it still accessible is Nintendo, up to a certain capacity, saved that game up there somewhere, or someone saved the official copy of the game somewhere and made it available on the internet for people to have a look at and have a check on it. If the original source file of Super Mario Brothers today got lost back in 1990s, we probably wouldn't have been able to pretty much like check what the game is about, or like what the hype around a platformer like Super Mario Brothers 2 is. So that is like one of the more core reasons why game preservation is important. And of course, like as I said, consoles, just like any other electronics out there, tends to break down over the time, and it is pretty natural because electronics are made like that. So they are bound to break down someday down the line. So game preservation allows someone to like have a look at an essence of the console, even if not the real deal, to a certain capacity. So those are like few of the reasons why game preservation is important. Of course, there are like much more reasons out there, like more nuanced reasons. But I thought like, okay, these 3 points are the core reasons why game preservation is important, pretty important. But once again, after speaking so much negative things about the game preservation and companies not taking care of it, things are changing, just like every other game out there, especially in the current time when game preservation has become a very hot topic of debate between developers, platform holders, and even collectors and gamers such as myself. So it's not all bad right now. For example, like studios like Digital Eclipse, Night Dive Studios, and many more others out there are actively working with developers and publishers to ensure that old games are right now readily accessible and available for everyone to have a look at and purchase and play actively. Night Dive Studios were one of the first persons who actively sought out to find the source code and rights for System Shock so that it is readily available for anyone to go out there and purchase. The funniest bit is the reason Night Dive Studios exist right now is because the CEO of the company wanted to play System Shock, the first two System Shock 2, and him realizing that the games are not officially available to purchase anywhere unless you're searching for a seed big box copy with someone, which costs hundreds and thousands of dollars. So he took it upon himself. He went out there, searched for the company who has the rights, purchased the rights, got together a group of people who knows how to reverse engineer and code and develop video games, and released the first System Shock out there. Similarly, Night Dive Studio right now very recently released a game called Power Slave Assumed, which is a game from Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, and PC, with 3 different versions between all 3 of those games. And that game was not available to purchase at all up until February, when they finally found out who the rights holders are, and now it is available out there. Similarly, Digital Eclipse is pretty well known on doing remasters and re-releases with like other companies for their games, such as they have done the Mega Man collection, collaborating with Capcom. They have done the Street Fighter 30th anniversary, which they have worked with Capcom once again in re-releasing the old arcade ports of the games. They have worked with SNK in releasing the Samurai Showdown fighting games from the arcade times. And very recently, they have worked on remastering and re-releasing the Aladdin, Lion King, and DuckTales games for Disney. And they're currently also working on re-releasing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle NES and SNES games for Konami. They are like it's very happening right now when it comes to like preservation, when it comes to preserving video games, and it really makes me happy. Video Game History Foundation is one of the organizations out there who are actively working together with various collectors, publishers, developers, ensuring that they keep the games preserved. Most of the people who are in this organization are active collectors or owners of retro video game shops, and their work revolves somewhere around as simple as preserving physical medium to collecting old school video game magazines and making them available at a time, making them available for people to have a look at. They are like one of the few groups, I would say, apart from the casual collectors, who are ensuring that video games as an art form is preserved properly for the future generation to have a look at. And finally, as I said, publishers are now actively taking interest in getting their backlog preserved. I'll use a good example of EA games and them remastering the first 2 Command and Conquer games, which were not on an official capacity available for anyone to purchase and play. So they worked with the Singapore-based studios and some other independent contractors, and they remastered the game and made sure that it is now available for anyone to purchase and play. And people can, of course, like switch between both the versions, the classic version and the remastered version. And a lot of other companies also are ensuring that video games are preserved, like Microsoft Xbox being one of those few one of the few software giants who are working alongside various publishers in ensuring that their old titles are backward compatible with the current modern console, so that people can check out what the games from the yesteryears were like. So it is changing. The change is slow. It will take a long while, but thanks to a lot of noise around the gaming circles and people being much more aware of things now, things are changing for the lack of better, for the better. Sorry about that. Sure, there are a lot of other ways, and there is a long way to go when it comes to when it comes to like proper preservation of video games. But but something is better than nothing, I would say. So we do not know what the future holds, but for now, things are like things are getting better. There are people out there, normal gamers are actively, like making noise like, hey, we want this game. Can you guys please try to make sure that it is released? There was a point where No One Lives Forever almost became a thing once again, is because people were very vocal about replaying the game, and Night Dive Studios going out of their way in ensuring that 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 dream became a reality. Unfortunately, it didn't, because of, again, the copyright laws and everything revolving around it. But someone tried, and I can 100% say that this will keep on going, and the preservation of and video game preservation in the near future is going to be a very hot topic. And with that being said, that is it for my talk. Thank you so much, whoever was here. I didn't want it to extend it very long. I just wanted to keep it very concise and just wanted to put my points forward very directly. And I hope you guys enjoyed what I wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sampad. This was a fascinating talk, and I'm sure
you
we're
so
going
much.
to have a lot of questions and opportunities to discuss things further. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat box, and we have enough time for people to speak and pose their questions personally. So please raise your hand if you would like to pose your question. Otherwise, I'll read it from the chat. Ishan can begin.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you,
Yeah.
Ishan.
Sorry for the bad audio. I'm on the road, so it's like
No, it's all fine. It's all fine. You're actually on the road right now and like listening to my talk.
Yeah, I am. Right, here's the point.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask two things. First, I've already asked in the chat that hasn't Nintendo been one of the more prominent companies that has been slapping court cases left and right on even genuine game preserving organizations? And second, this is just a tangential thought, but just a thought. Do you feel like a dependence on consoles is hindering game preservation? In that PC games, especially those past, say, a certain point, are more likely to be, it's just easier in a way to find PC games than it is to preserve console games. So do you feel like a dependence on gaming consoles has led to this position? Especially in light of things like exclusivity deals that are coming up now, which, shifts an entire set of games onto consoles. So how do you see that looking for the future of game preservation?
Very valid questions, I would say. To answer the first question, yes, Nintendo is like one of the big examples of when big media companies are very power hungry, and they are like, oh, our IP should not go out there anywhere. If I do not know how many people are aware of it, but Nintendo was in the news back in 2018 or 17, when they shut down two of the biggest emulation and ROM sites out there, called coolroms.com and Emu Paradise, citing that both of the sites are promoting piracy, which to a certain extent, I would say, yes, it did, but you also need to like take it into consideration when any companies out there are not actively making their backlog IPs readily available to people to have a look at. Emulation and ROMs are the only ways to access them properly, and that is one of a valid way of preserving video games. So Nintendo is one of the core reasons of what you should not do if you are a big video game company when it comes to preservation. So I hope that answered the first question. And second question, I would say it is a mixed bag, to be honest, because again, sure, if PC games are a thing, then it is much more easier to like preserve them. But at the same time, like the only way to like preserve video games right now, from the console standpoint, is if someone is like saving that video, like someone is like putting that video game as like a physical medium, because digital only console is slowly pushing towards the whole digital only mindset right now, which is kind of alarming, because after a certain point, you need to understand that those games are stored on a particular cloud server out there somewhere. And when that cloud server shuts down someday, the chances of you accessing that game is like nil to zero. So I won't outright say that console games are like one of the reasons why video game preservation may be hindered, but they do kind of also that contributes to the whole stuff, contributes to the whole thing. I hope that
Right.
answered
Thank
your
you. I just
question.
the thing is that I realized I phrased my question poorly.
Mhm.
One of the things that was in my head, but I neglected to mention, was that a problem of console dependence is that emulation becomes very necessary.
Yes,
And
definitely.
in order to preserve games, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
because at the end of the day, PC is the most conducive medium.
Yep.
Therefore, when companies are cracking down left and right like this on emulation and emulating softwares and the like, it just seems a little bleak to me, in the sense that if companies continue doing what they are, console games will slowly dry out from, catalogs and
Yeah.
store places.
Yes.
That
yes.
was my point, really.
Yeah, that is a very valid point, if you look at it like that. But again, as I said near the end of the talk, that companies are slowly shifting and changing towards the way they are functioning. Sure, Nintendo may take a long time to change the ways they work, but I'm still kind of optimistic that they would change their ways somehow, because compared to Nintendo, the other game, like other console publishers, are not that intrusive when it comes to like emulation or game preservation in general. They are like, hey, it is your copy, what do you want to do, it is up to you. Especially Microsoft is a very good example when it comes to like game preservation in a way. Sure, they are also kind of like, it is very flip-flop when it comes to Microsoft, but the positives kind of outweighs the negatives for the company, at least to me, when it comes to Xbox. So yeah, you never know never, I would say.
Right, that makes
Thank you,
sense. Thank
Shan.
you.
No worries.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so
Shan,
much.
for your question. Shovik, would you like to pose next?
Is that me or Shovik Kaur? Which one?
It's you.
Which
It's
one?
you.
Okay.
It is
Shovik
you.
Mukherjee.
Sampad, thank you. It's a great talk and really,
you.
really important. So
Hmm.
my question, I think it'll also tie into Hario's question, is I'm sitting in Finland like right now, and in this town there is a Pelimuseum, there's a games museum. So and I've been to games museums in many parts of the world. One in Berlin, video games museums I'm talking about, and there was one in Manchester, which was founded only, and also in Nottingham where I lived, which was the Manchester one was founded only for the preservation of video games, really. And then James Newman did a lot of work around it, Newman, and then they moved it to Nottingham. So one of the things is to look at the possibility of having museums which would be able to, replicate the exact scenario. For example, also thinking of preserving games. I mean, you mentioned history. Now in India, we have, I mean, most of us have not seen an Amiga computer.
Yeah.
But some of the older games were played on Amiga, and most of these European kind of researchers, whenever you talk to them, they will talk about the Amiga. Even people your age would. So we have, I mean, it's also kind of preserving history that we have never seen. So that's one part of it, and also preserving what has been available. You have talked about kind of Nintendo. You've talked about Microsoft, about EA. One of my questions is sorry, the museum part is a comment, but my question is regarding Indian video games.
Yes.
Indian video games, like for example, going back as far as Yodha to Bhagat Singh to kind of the later ones that came after, right? These are mainly PC games, and there were some console games. Remember the horrible Ghajini?
Yes,
and then
I remember.
Yeah,
The Hanuman games for PlayStation 2.
it's very, very tragic. And then
Yeah.
this company called Trine created Street Cricket, and
Hmm.
PS2 is now kind of an Hanuman Boy Warrior.
Yes,
So
yes.
what will happen regarding these kinds of games, regarding the kind of preservation of these games in India? And my
Hmm.
second point is regarding archive.org and other places
Hmm. Hmm.
which do allow you to kind of actually upload games
Hmm.
and then emulate them.
Hmm.
Because you mentioned Japanese games, and I remember one of the first Kojima games that were ever
Yes.
was Snatcher,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I was able to kind of emulate Snatcher and play it. So yeah, so I mean these are two different questions, but one is
Yes.
about the Indian games and the other one
Hmm.
is about kind of web platforms.
Uh, I would say like the way we can only preserve the Indian origin video games is like if someone has a physical media out there and they themselves are like preserving it by themselves, because the problem with most of the Indian video games, like Indian origin video games from that era, is that none of those companies like up to a certain capacity does not exist anymore. They have either become an outsourced studio which does like artwork or something, or they have like altogether dissolved because of various financial issues. So it is a very sad thing, but unfortunately, I personally do not see those games like being preserved to a certain capacity compared to like, let's say, some of the bigger international games out there, which I talked about a lot in my talk. So unless like someone from the community themselves are like preserving it, uh I personally do not feel like there is any way of like keeping those games like preserved properly, sadly. I think that answers my question, answers your question.
I think yes. So
Hmm.
I'm going to also respond here with an open call.
Hmm.
If I set up a video game museum,
Yeah.
how many of you will kind of actively help me out, whether in terms of kind of money or kind of volunteer like the support? Because I really want to start a video game museum in India. I will
Hmm.
provide the space, provide the equipment,
Hmm.
and well, we'll see what happens after.
I'm down to help as a volunteer, if not anything. I like
Absolutely.
I always like retro video games. Like that is something I enjoy more than like the modern video games. So like I'm always interested in like the tech from the yesteryears. So I would be interested in like helping you out with it.
I mean, what it will take is just for me to install like a couple of old consoles and
Hmm.
a PC with kind of like compatible emulator software to start it off with. And
Hmm.
then we can see what can happen. I mean, we
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
always ask for money from people
Yeah,
and see if,
you got to start somewhere basically.
yep.
Like someone has to take the initiative and start somewhere. Also, what was your other question, if you do not mind?
It was on kind of online kind of platforms like archive.org,
Hmm.
which actually save,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
actually allow these kind of abandonware, quote
Hmm.
unquote, to
Hmm.
be emulated
Hmm.
and played. So, uh, I mean, what do you see? I mean, how much of the role do you see? Although you did mention if the server is gone, then that's gone as well.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
archive.org is gone, then these games are gone as well. But well, I'm just saying.
Archive.org still, I would say, like, of course, like anything out there always has that problem of, like going away someday. Like, let's say some preservation museum, like hypothetically speaking, let's say some sort of like a preservation house today, like houses a lot of physical media, goes off in flames for like some reason or the other. That means like a lot of medias out there are like just gone like that. You cannot do anything about it. See, the case is also similar for like archive.org. It is still saved on a online space. It always risks the chance of like getting taken down, or like the servers going down someday, making it inaccessible to anyone. But at the same time, archive.org is also like one of the key organization who plays a big role into ensuring that the video games are preserved. In fact, archive.org actively back in 2018 try to bring the video game medium in line when it comes to movie and other media preservations, but it wasn't very successful. because of the ESA laws, the Entertainment Software Association laws, which are in line for the big companies to protect their IPs and copyright laws. So again, it all boils down to the copyright laws basically. But yes, archive.org plays a big key role into video game preservation, because I have personally gone to like archive.org to search for like various games which are not readily available but are like there in a form of a ROM file. So yes, I guess I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Sofik, for asking such fascinating questions. Hario, I request you to ask your question next, please.
So thank you, Sampad, for the fantastic talk. I think
Thank you.
Dr. Sofik already brought out a bit about my question. So the question would be like, can you please explain the curatorial process of Video Game History Foundation that you mentioned during the presentation, and also like what you when you mentioned foundation, does the organization have like an official endorsement from, let's say, in the Ministry of Art or Culture, or it's just in a sense a community like that,
it is a non-profit organization.
Okay.
First thing first, it is under the it's a 501c3 non-profit organization through and through. They are not under any governing body. It's just like a bunch of people who are like very much into preserving and who are very much into retro video games, like coming together in making sure that the video games are preserved basically. And their curation process all boils down to the members of the foundation. They come together with various people out, like various industry people out there. They sit down with them, they talk about like, okay, what medium should we like preserve, because Video Game History Foundation not only preserves physical mediums, they also preserve like the video game magazines from like old times, like let's say Edge or E1M1. So they try to get in touch with the rights holder. They sit down with them, they talk like what can they do to make sure that they are preserved and kept properly for other people to like have a look at it. Because one of their projects is a research library where they are like building like their country's first dedicated library for the study of video games. So they do collect magazines going back somewhere into the late 70s, and also international publications, foreign language magazines, a lot of other things. I would really recommend you to go and have a look at their website, which is gamehistory.org, where they have mentioned like everything properly about what are their missions, what are their projects, who are their team members, and what are their backgrounds and everything. And they also have a very active podcast where they talk about topics related to like game preservation and retro video games and everything.
Okay. And perhaps a second question, like a follow-up question, like what can you tell from what the Video Game History Foundation what they've been doing, and what can you tell about the game history and in India? Like, for example, in Indonesia, based on my research about from a game museum, we can take conclusion like that the history of video game in Indonesia is subordinate to that of Japan. So it become like perhaps a satellite state of again Japanese gaming culture. What do you think can be said about Indian gaming culture based on the historical approach?
I don't really know how to answer this question properly. I mean, I unfortunately have to like put my hands up for this one, because I honestly do not know like how to answer this question. Apologies for that.
Okay. So, but again, thank you for you explained about the again the process of again the preserving the game. So it's interesting to see that they do not only preserve the video game themselves, but also supporting media surrounding video games. That's definitely interesting.
I would again like really suggest you to like go through their website and check out their work, because they are doing some of the best preservation works out there, I would say. Personally, like on a personal level, I feel like that.
Okay, so it's like the gamehistory.org.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Thanks so much, Sampad.
No worries. Thank you so much for the questions.
Thank you, Haru, also for giving us questions to think about later and get back to. I think these are the best parts of our talks where the
Yes.
discussion continues. And we have Sampad to thank for that too, for giving us opportunities like this.
No, I mean,
Orutro-
I want to like thank you people for basically having me over here for this, because again, as I said, my hands were shaking when I was giving this talk, because I generally do not talk like I generally do not give talks like this, right? Like this is the first time someone like invited me and asked me to, like talk about a topic on video games. And I remember texting Shobikda after that Shobikda, what should I talk about? And he's like, well, just talk about a particular topic, like talk about you being a gamer in India. And I was like, that would be very generalized, because everyone has like a different experience, right? So how about just like try to talk about video game preservation, because that is something I was working on back then. Like the article basically.
No, I'm sure it's going to be the first of many more talks.
You never know.
Orithro has been waiting since quite a while to ask you some very exciting questions. So Orithro, go wild, ask away.
Okay, so I have questions in two parts. First question would be, I was thinking as in how of the preservation, how the games are being preserved. And in this regards, I was also thinking recently there has also been a lot of talk and debates going about accessibility.
Yep.
And you already mentioned Night Dive. And one of the interesting things that they had done with System Shock's the remaster
Yes.
quotation mark that they did was added a mouse look, which was not even there in the first place in the first game ever. And so it also, adding the mouse look itself changed a lot of things. And this might sound like a very, very simple thing to talk about, but it's also an important thing in many kinds of games.
Yes.
Because there, for example, you also brought up the Silent Hill HD collection remaster, the thing that happened. And another, the most criticized aspect of it was the limitation of the fog. That was,
other stuff which I really don't want to start cribbing about.
Exactly. I'm just pointing out the very obvious remaster effect that happened.
Yes.
And it was in terms of making it more accessible. While in case of System Shock is kind of very accessible, and also with a lot less screen clutter that there is with the full screen effect that they have added. So that's what I'm thinking, that what should be the course of preservation when we are talking about game preservation, that what part should we keep in, what are the issues that more primitive hardwares that had created, primitive technology that had created, what parts should we keep in and what parts should we keep out while we are trying to preserve?
I would say like take nothing out, keep everything in, keep the essence of the game
in terms
also, but add on top of like the game. But here's the thing, re-releasing and remastering video games is not about like picking up a particular game and just like throwing it out there. A lot of things are taken into consideration, and it requires a lot of money. The reason why System Shock 1 re-release had a mouse control is because that was something very necessary to have in that game. Of course, it is a toggleable option, but it is an accessibility option, which is very much welcoming, especially for someone like me who has the attention span of a sparrow and who cannot play a game like that. I like to call System Shock 1 as a calculator game because of the amount of information which is like on my screen. So that is something I like to call it. But yes, I would say, as I said, like keep everything in, but if possible, like add on top of those things so that it becomes much more accessible for the future generation to basically access. System Shock 1 re-release is a good example of a good video game preservation, because It is very
Exactly.
much accessible for
Hmm.
any generation of people to actually download and play. Of course, like if you like that game or not, that is completely very subjective based on like what kind of a game a certain person plays. But at least it is accessible. You do not have to like, sit down and press your arrow keys for the camera movement and then WSAD key to like move to a certain point. You can now use your mouse and like turn your head around and everything. So Night Dive Studio once again is a good example of video game preservation, like a company doing good video game preservation, because like almost every of their re-releases or remasters have like something or the other like accessibility options put into it. And it is possible because it is because they can do it, because they have the resources for it. Not every game out there will have that same amount of liberty or resource available for people to like for the people who are like preserving it to have, because some games are something which is like completely null and void based on like who owns what or who owns like any part of it. In those certain cases, just like normal preservation, you just keep it and ensure that the game is protected properly. There are few titles I can't seem to remember from the top of my mind, but I'm 100% sure there were like certain titles out there which are like that, where it's just like a normal pick and put, but there are no chances of maybe like re-releasing them to a certain capacity because of like nobody knows like who owns what. It's just it's just there. So I guess that answers your question.
Yeah, exactly. I was also thinking the same way. But moving on to my second observation, come question, whatever you might take it as. So moving on, I was also thinking about version differences. Okay.
Yes.
So in video games, version itself is a very important thing, so much so that it has made itself a place in citations also.
Yes.
That which version, which edition we are playing. So I was also thinking, and this also came up due to regarding in view of Rockstar's latest remasters of Grand Theft Auto San
Don't even
Andreas.
get me started.
The
That was a
definitive
beautiful
exactly.
experience. That was a
And I was
beautiful
also-
experience reviewing.
And I was also thinking that they were remastering these games, and not just remastering, they were actively destroying the original source that they were. So that's an interesting thing. It also can be seen in case of, for example, the PT, the PT game that were
Playboy teaser.
Exactly. So they had deleted and uninstalled that, removed from, actively pursued like witch hunters to try to destroy this game. And I was thinking that also, and to some extent it makes sense, because which version is the definitive version. And with this regards, also I'm thinking and trying to find a correlation with other medium. And one big example that comes up is Blade Runner, because Blade Runner has similar such issues with several different editions, theatrical cut, final cut, and all these. So I'm also thinking that preserving which version is also a good so that's also a question, that preserving which version, and who gets to decide, who should decide which edition should stay, then or whether all should be all editions should stay. Because even in case of every other different editions, there might be some editions rights belong to one publisher, there are some editions which rights belong to other. So this is also another question that comes up with me. So what are your thoughts on it?
I particularly like, again, like this all comes down to once again the whole copyright issue, because end of the day, any or every version of the game is being like held hostage by a big publisher, right? So sure, in a more like a rational society, I would say like like a particular group of body should be there who can take the charge of like what version should be saved or like what version should not be saved. But unfortunately for now, I think like the only people who might be able to like take that decision are the platform holders very sadly. Like there isn't any sort of like proper answer to this, at least from my end, to be honest, I would say, because this is like something which doesn't have like a proper answer to like speak about, at least I think right now, because there is no like solution for this, like at least a proper solution. Because as I said, like back in 2018, some people did raise this point, like there are certain laws which protects these companies from keeping the titles hostage, to the point that like people cannot like preserve a particular video game or like a particular version of a particular game unless they allow it themselves, Nintendo being like one of the very big examples of it. So yeah, I guess like that is one way to like look into it. Sadly, like I do not see, like unless there is some sort of the governing body which actively takes part in ensuring the video games are preserved, which there isn't in an official proper capacity yet, apart from like the NGO organizations. It is very difficult to like see who gets to decide which copy is saved. I would say like just protect like what copy is available out there, because again, it's like something is better than nothing, to be honest. Like if you keep on cribbing about who gets to like have what copy or who gets to save like what version, there is a big chance of like anything and everything like getting lost altogether. So like might as well like keep something instead of like nothing.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uthro, for asking such great questions. We are running out of time, but I feel we can take one comment question, which I think Hario wants to ask. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Sampad. I think you keep mentioning about I would say again, like the big publisher, like chasing down people who perhaps exhibits or preserve without the official permission. But my question is, do officials, do authorities in India actually take that matter seriously, or how?
There is video games are not taken like video game doesn't hold that amount of importance, at least right now in our country. Like at least from my viewpoint, like it doesn't hold that kind of importance, because if it had that kind of importance, games which have come out in the yesteryears would probably have been preserved in a much more proper way right now, which isn't. The only game which is readily available and which is made by Indian publishers and developers are like 2 video games on PC and the numerous other smaller mobile centric video games, because India right now is a very mobile centric market compared to like proper traditional market. Like I think 52% share is held by mobile game market. So it's like free open field for like everyone to like do whatever they want with, at least with Indian video games right now, sadly, unless someone takes the initiative someday, like yes, we are gonna be like preserve it and all.
So it can be seen as an opportunity.
Yes, it is a big opportunity. Like okay. I'm pretty optimistic that someone will take this initiative here, and I will be right there like looking at it like, oh, it is happening, like as a volunteer or something, wink wink, just saying. But yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Sampad.
No worries. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you so much. I know I said one last, but I do believe Orko has been trying to ask a question or pose a comment.
Oh, definitely. I am enjoying these questions actually, because it is letting me like think what I should be answering, because I wasn't prepared for the question. So I was like, okay, I need to like hold my chair and be ready for like what questions are coming towards me. So I'm like really enjoying this.
Orko, would you like to pose your question or your comment? I think he's having. He's here.
Awesome. Connection.
Yeah, I can feel that connection issue.
One thing I wanted. One thing is that of creating a video game.
I'm so sorry, your voice is breaking up. Maybe type it into the chat box, and
I think he did type it, right?
Yeah. Do you want me to read it out for you?
I mean, it's fine. I mean, I can also read. Actually, you know what? I would let you read that. It would be better that way, if you do not mind.
Sure. I'll read it out. Orko says, I think that DRM systems also actively prevent attempts of game preservation, especially the modern systems. The older code wheel type systems were better, I think, but going DRM free not only helps the consumer, but also supports the practice of game preservation.
Yes, I absolutely 100% agree with this. If you guys remember when I was giving my final closing thoughts, like I did mention that Microsoft has been doing quite a good things when it comes to game preservation, and some things which are like not really good. This DRM system practice for Microsoft is one of the negatives which is there for which is like there, because Microsoft has this very absurd way of like doing the backward compatibility, is that your system has to always be online, and that online check is there because of the DRM practice. Like they are ensuring that, okay, this is something legal and this is there. What you own is not yours. If you're buying a game on PlayStation or Xbox, you're not buying a copy of that game digitally. You're buying a license to use that game for a particular set amount of time, which is up to the game publisher who is selling that game. So this is 100% a really good valid point. Making games DRM free not only helps in like ensuring that the game is much more readily available for anyone and everyone to see, because let's say I buy a particular game and my friend wants to check it, but he doesn't have the means to, you know, like buy and check that game. I can basically like hand him over the copy and go like, you know, just download it, just play it. Instead of, you know, sitting down, making sure that the game goes through like 5 systems in a day, check so that it is a legal copy because of the DRM and everything involved in it. Good Old Games is a very good example when it comes to like the DRM free practices out there, because their whole motto is ensuring that the games are DRM free and they sell only DRM free games. So their games are like very much accessible, and they also target the old the previous generation games, the old games ways, which are not readily available at a certain point, but are now like pretty much very much available for like anyone to download and play. I have played a lot of games from like GOG.com because of like being DRM free. I have also purchased a lot of games from GOG.com just because like they are DRM free. And it is really good that a company like that exists in the current year, because almost all the video game ecosystem out there are very DRM dependent. And that again makes sense, because they don't want the source file or the copies of the game or anything to like leak out there for like anyone and everyone to like tinker and use and throw out. But at the same time, like if they are that controlling of everything, what is the point of like, you know, owning something or like saving something?
Right. Thank you so much. Especially thanks to Orpo for starting off such a good discussion. With this, we are coming to the end of the talk since we're running out of time. I also feel that the discussions we've been having should help us situate game preservation as something also that centers sustainability and accessibility during game production processes itself.
Yes.
It should not always be a process that comes after, I believe. But that is a conversation that we will have to continue some other time. Meanwhile, on behalf of Digra India, I would like to thank everyone who made this event so successful. Firstly, thank you to our speaker, Sampad, for delivering this wonderful talk for us. It has been such an enlightening one that has led to much fruitful discussion. Thank you also to my co-moderator, Orithro, and everyone on the organizing team for all your help. Lastly, thank you to our brilliant audience. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and see you all very soon.